She stood there, barely 8 years old, her blonde curls bouncing as she raised her hand. The room fell silent. Tucker Carlson, known for tackling tough political debates, turned toward her. He expected a question about news, government, maybe even the economy, but what she asked, it stopped him cold. Her voice was small but steady. "Mr. Carlson, do you believe in God?" The crowd held its breath. Before he could answer, she added something that sent chills down the room. "Because last night, he spoke to me." What she said next changed everything. Tucker Carlson wasn't easily caught off guard. He had interviewed world leaders, debated the sharpest minds, and faced countless live TV showdowns. But this was different. He leaned forward, studying the little girl. She stood confidently, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes wide and unblinking. The audience was completely still, waiting. Tucker finally spoke. "God spoke to you." She nodded. "Yes." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowd, some amused, some skeptical, but the girl didn't waver. "He told me something important," she said. "Something he wants everyone to know." Tucker glanced at the audience, then back at her. This wasn't a moment for politics, debate, or ratings. This was something else entirely. "What did he tell you?" he asked. The girl took a deep breath. "He said, people have forgotten him, and he's coming back soon." A hush fell over the room. Some leaned in, curious. Others shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances, uncertain whether to take her words seriously. But Tucker, he wasn't laughing. Because deep down, something about what she said felt unsettlingly real. Tucker's fingers tapped lightly on the desk, his mind racing. He had spent years discussing politics, culture, and society. But this was different. He kept his voice steady. "Why do you think people have forgotten him?" The girl looked around the room, her small face serious. "Because they don't talk to him anymore. They only ask for things when they're scared, but they don't listen when he talks back." A murmur spread through the audience. Some nodded, others smirked. A few exchanged skeptical glances, but no one spoke. Tucker tilted his head. "And how did he talk to you?" The girl hesitated, then said something that made the room go completely silent. "In a dream," she whispered. "I was in a beautiful place, a field with golden grass, and the sky was the prettiest blue I've ever seen. There was a man sitting on a rock, smiling at me. He had the kindest eyes." Tucker's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something careful, guarded. "And you think that was God?" The girl nodded. "I know it was." He pressed his lips together, choosing his next words carefully. "And what else did he say?" The girl blinked as if trying to remember every word exactly. "He said the world is getting darker, that people are too busy arguing and being angry to see what's coming." Someone in the crowd let out a nervous chuckle, but it died quickly. Tucker leaned forward. "What's coming?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "The time when everyone has to choose." A chill ran through the room. Tucker sat back, his fingers no longer tapping. His usual smirk was gone. Because something about this little girl, her confidence, her certainty, made it impossible to brush off. And for the first time in a long time he didn't know what to say next. A heavy silence filled the studio. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to dismiss the girl's words or lean in closer. Even Tucker, known for his sharp comebacks and piercing questions, hesitated. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You said everyone has to choose." "Choose what?" The girl clasped her hands together, between the truth and the lie. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Tucker frowned. "And what's the lie?" She looked straight at him. "That we don't need him." Tucker exhaled slowly, rubbing his chin. He had spent years covering political scandals, corruption, and cultural decay. He had seen people lose faith in their leaders, their country, and even themselves. But this was something different. He leaned forward. "And what happens if people choose wrong?" The little girl hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but every word was crystal clear. "They won't hear him anymore." Tucker stared at her. "You mean like, he'll stop talking to them?" She shook her head. "No, they'll stop being able to listen." A man in the audience cleared his throat. Someone else muttered something under their breath. The air in the room had changed, heavier, charged with something unspoken. Tucker studied her, trying to read between the lines. And what does that mean? The girl's eyes darkened, like she was remembering something she didn't want to. In my dream, I saw a city. Her fingers twisted in front of her. It looked normal at first. People were walking, talking, laughing. But then, I saw their faces. Tucker tilted his head. What was wrong with their faces? She swallowed hard. They looked empty, like their eyes were open, but they weren't really there. A shiver ran through the audience. Even the cameraman shifted uncomfortably. Tucker crossed his arms. And you think this is going to happen? She nodded. It already is. Someone in the back scoffed. A quiet chuckle broke the tension, but it didn't last. Because the little girl wasn't smiling. Tucker let out a slow breath. He had spent years calling out deception, questioning narratives, and challenging people's beliefs. But sitting in front of him was a child who spoke with more certainty than most adults he'd ever met. And he couldn't shake the feeling that whether people believed her or not, she wasn't making this up. Tucker's voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, or maybe something deeper. So if this is already happening, what do people need to do? The girl's answer came without hesitation. They need to listen. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone scoffed, but others sat frozen, waiting for her to continue. Tucker raised an eyebrow. Listen to what? The girl blinked, as if the answer should have been obvious. To him. He's still talking. Tucker let out a breath, rubbing his chin. You're saying God is speaking to everyone, but most people can't hear him. She nodded. Because they're too busy listening to everything else. For the first time, Tucker didn't have a comeback. He had built a career on questioning, challenging, even provoking. But something about this girl, her certainty, her simplicity, made it impossible to argue. The studio was eerily quiet. Even the usual rustling of papers, shifting of seats, and hum of whispered side conversations had stopped. Then the girl added something that made the air feel even heavier. He said this is the last chance. Tucker's forehead creased. Last chance for what? She took a deep breath. For people to wake up, before it's too late. A nervous chuckle came from the back. Tucker glanced toward the sound, but quickly turned back to the girl. His voice was softer now. And what happens if they don't? The girl hesitated. Then, for the first time, she looked afraid. In my dream, after the city went quiet, I heard something. Her voice dropped, barely a whisper. It was a sound I've never heard before. It was like crying, but not from people. Tucker's stomach tightened. What do you mean? She shook her head. It was the earth, like the whole world was mourning. A shudder ran through the audience. Some people exchanged glances. A woman clutched her purse a little tighter. Tucker swallowed, his throat dry. He had covered stories of war, economic collapse, riots in the streets, but none of those things had ever made him feel like this. Finally, he cleared his throat. And you really believe all of this? The girl looked him dead in the eye. I don't just believe it, I know it. Tucker leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, he had no words, and in the silence, it became painfully clear. Neither did anyone else. Tucker sat still, his fingers resting on the desk. The weight of the girl's words pressed down on the room like a thick fog. No one spoke, no one even moved. Finally, he found his voice. And what happens next? The girl exhaled, glancing down at her hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were glassy, like she had seen something no child should ever have to see. I don't know, she admitted. He didn't show me that part. Tucker studied her, searching for any sign of doubt. There was none. So what are people supposed to do? He asked. Her answer was simple. Pray. Tucker let that word hang in the air. Pray for what? She tilted her head, as if the answer should have been obvious. To hear him, before it's too late. The silence in the studio stretched long and deep. Even the hum of the cameras, the quiet rustling of the production crew, everything seemed to fade away. Tucker finally spoke, his voice softer than before. Do you really think people will listen? The little girl didn't blink. Some will. Tucker nodded slowly. tapping his fingers against the desk. And the others? She hesitated, then looked toward the cameras, as if speaking directly to whoever was watching. They'll find out soon enough. The screen faded to black. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.